Ed Sullivan, the legendary TV host, was known for launching the careers of countless stars, but not everyone who stepped onto his stage was met with open arms. One singer in particular drew Sullivan's ire so deeply that he became more than just a performer. He became a bitter rival. What began as a clash of personalities quickly spiraled into one of the most talked-about feuds in showbiz history, leaving behind a trail of cold stares, cancelled appearances, and unforgettable moments of tension played out before millions. Born on September 28, 1901, in Harlem, New York, Edward James Sullivan came from a world rich in culture and music. Though some records confuse his birthplace with Monterey Park, California, he was raised in Port Chester, New York, a family where music wasn't just background noise, it was the pulse of everyday life. From an early age, he was surrounded by melodies from the piano, heartfelt singing, and the warm crackle of phonograph records. Entertainment called to him, quietly shaping the boy who would one day shape American television. In high school, Sullivan was more than just a budding showman, he was a remarkable athlete. At Port Chester High School, he earned an astounding 12 varsity letters across several sports. Whether sprinting on the track, guarding the court in basketball, catching behind the plate in baseball, or pushing through the field as a halfback in football, Sullivan gave everything his all. Competing on integrated teams in New York and Connecticut also gave him something more than trophies. It nurtured a progressive mindset that would stay with him. Even in a world that wasn't always ready to change after graduating, Sullivan didn't dive straight into entertainment. Instead, he picked up a pen and became a sports writer for the Port Chester Daily Item. It was a modest beginning, preceded by a brief stint at the Hartford Post, but it opened doors. Before long, he was reporting for the New York Evening Mail, focusing on sports, his first real love. As the years passed, he bounced between publications: the Associated Press, the Philadelphia Bulletin, the Morning World, the Morning Telegraph, the New York Bulletin, and the Leader. When one paper shut down in 1923, another opportunity would rise not long after. In 1927, Sullivan joined the New York Evening Graphic as a sports writer, quickly climbing the ranks to become sports editor. But it was 1929 that marked a pivotal shift. Replacing Walter Winchell, he stepped into the hypershare role of Broadway columnist. Suddenly, Sullivan wasn't just writing about athletes, he was chronicling the pulse of the city's glitziest stages and most scandalous affairs. Later, at the New York Daily News, his column Little Old New York became essential reading, blending gossip, glamour, and grit into a narrative New Yorkers couldn't get enough of. This was the beginning of Sullivan the Gatekeeper, the man who could make or break a performer with a nod or a scowl. And for one talented, charismatic singer, the scowl never quite faded. Their feud wasn't just a clash of egos, it was a slow-burning conflict that mirrored the era's cultural tensions and personal pride. What really sparked the animosity? What was said and what was left unsaid? The answers lie in the moments that defined their infamous rivalry, and in the complicated man who was Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan's path from Broadway columnist to legendary television icon wasn't something even he could have predicted. His name became synonymous with Sunday night entertainment. But before that, he was a man chasing stories, guiding nightclub patrons through New York's glamorous underworld of rising singers and film stars, and even starring in the 1933 film Mr. Broadway. He had a gift not for performance, but for presence. He knew where the spotlight should land, even if it never suited him personally. In 1948, a turning point came when producer Marlo Lewis convinced Sullivan to try his hand at television. The result was Toast of the Town, a weekly Sunday night variety show on CBS at first. It was shaky, critics scoffed, ratings were poor, and even Sullivan's screen presence was deemed too awkward, too stiff, too plain. But that, ironically, became his strength. Audiences didn't see a polished host, they saw a man who seemed ordinary, accessible, and most of all, sincere. That authenticity gave him staying power. The show would eventually be renamed The Ed Sullivan Show, and it became one of the most iconic programs in television history. Sullivan's peculiar on-camera, demeanor reserved, slightly robotic, but strangely comforting, made him a household name. His true power, however, was behind the scenes. He had an extraordinary eye for talent and a sense for what America wanted to see before America even knew it. Vaudeville acts, comedians, singers, dancers, theater stars, he brought them all into living rooms across the country. He wasn't just hosting a show, he was curating culture. One of the most pivotal moments in the show's history came on September 9, 1956, when Elvis Presley finally appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. Sullivan had initially resisted inviting Elvis, wary of his rebellious image and provocative stage presence. But public demand was undeniable, and when Presley performed, it was nothing short of a phenomenon. Over 60 million people tuned in, a record-shattering audience that cemented both Elvis and Sullivan in entertainment history. That night proved that Sullivan could read the American pulse better than anyone. The momentum didn't stop. Perhaps the most legendary broadcast of them all came years later. On February 9, 1964, when the Beatles made their American debut on The Ed Sullivan Show, over 73 million people watched. Nearly 34% of the U.S. population sat in front of their TVs to witness the beginning of what would be called the British invasion. It wasn't just a performance, it was a cultural shift, and Sullivan was right at the center of it, once again introducing the future of music to the American public. In doing so, became more than a host. He became a kingmaker. The Ed Sullivan Show became a stage where future legends were made. The Supremes, Janis Joplin, the Rolling Stones all stood where Elvis and the Beatles had stood. The show had evolved into something electric, something unpredictable, and deeply woven into the social fabric of the country. Every Sunday night became a ritual, and Sullivan stood quietly at its helm. The understated guardian of American entertainment, but not every act was met with Sullivan's approval. One artist in particular never quite fit into the mold Sullivan tried to uphold. That artist was Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly, born Charles Hardin Holly on September 7, 1936, in Lubbock, Texas, was a different kind of performer. Raised in a musical family steeped in country and gospel, Holly showed prodigious talent early on, mastering the guitar and piano as a child and performing in local bands by his teenage years. His big break came in 1955, when he was chosen to open for Elvis Presley. Inspired, Holly leaned hard into rock and roll, forming the Crickets in 1957 with Nicky Sullivan, Joby Malden, and Jerry Allison. Their song That'll Be the Day shot to #1, and a new sound was born. Holly wasn't just another teen idol. He was a songwriter, a band leader, a studio innovator. He didn't wait to be shaped by the industry. He shaped it himself. And that independence clashed hard with Sullivan's tightly controlled vision of television. Their relationship was strained from the start. When Holly and the Crickets were invited to perform, Sullivan found them unruly and unpolished. He reportedly criticized their appearance, demanded changes to their performance, and grew increasingly hostile. Holly, unwilling to bend, pushed back. The tension simmered, then exploded. What followed was more than a disagreement. It was a full-blown feud. Sullivan cut their performance time. He introduced them coldly. He allegedly tried to censor the lyrics to their songs. But Holly, calm and confident, performed anyway, standing his ground. Not just as a musician, but as a symbol of a changing America. One where youthful defiance, creativity, and authenticity couldn't be confined by an old guard's expectations. Their final encounter marked the end of Holly's appearances on the show, but the moment left a mark. It was clear that the future of music was slipping out of the hands of network hosts like Sullivan and into the hands of the artists themselves. Ed Sullivan will always be remembered as the man who brought America to its cultural tipping points. But with Buddy Holly, he met a talent he couldn't shape, and in that clash, both men revealed who they truly were. One, a gatekeeper of tradition. The other, a pioneer of revolution. Together, their feud became a footnote in history, but a powerful one, reminding us how entertainment is never just about the show. It's about the fight over who gets to take the stage. Buddy Holly's rise to national fame was meteoric. With his fresh fusion of rockabilly and rhythm and blues, he brought something unmistakably new to the music scene. His sound was energetic, his performances electric, and audiences across the country connected instantly. Songs like That'll Be the Day weren't just hits on the Billboard Hot 100. They were defining moments in a cultural shift that was already beginning to reshape America's musical identity. Though his time in the spotlight was tragically short, Mark Holley left on rock and roll was indelible. But behind the scenes, not everyone embraced this revolution. Holley's relationship with one of the most powerful figures in television, Ed Sullivan, quickly soured. What started with promise ended in one of the most talked-about rivalries in early rock history. On December 1st, 1957, Buddy Holly and the Crickets made their debut on The Ed Sullivan Show. They played their breakout hit, That'll Be the Day, and left the stage with roaring applause. It should have been the beginning of a long and fruitful partnership with America's most watched variety show. But it wasn't. When Holly and his band returned on January 26, 1958, Sullivan was ready with a request. He wanted them to swap out their chosen song, Oh Boy, for something more subdued. He worried the number was too wild, too suggestive, too much for family television. But Holly stood his ground. He refused to change the set list, insisting on performing the very song that was captivating youth across the country. That moment, that simple no, drew a line in the sand. The performance that followed was thick with tension. Sullivan was visibly displeased, and it showed. In what many saw as a deliberate slight, he mispronounced Holly's name on air, introducing him as Buddy Holly Swan. To make matters worse, Holly's guitar microphone was mysteriously cut. A technical issue almost unheard of on such a well-oiled production. Whether by accident or design, it didn't stop the Crickets. They played on, unfazed, and the crowd responded with enthusiasm. But the discomfort between host and guest was unmistakable. What should have been a routine second appearance became national news. Headlines speculated about the feud. Opinion columns dissected every detail. Some accused Sullivan of trying to suppress a new generation of artists. Others claimed Holly was arrogant and disrespectful. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a spat. It was a symbol. A generational clash. The polished, old-world control of Ed Sullivan versus the raw, unfiltered spirit of rock and roll, embodied by Buddy Holly for Sullivan. The incident added another layer to his already complex reputation. Too many in the industry, he was seen as authoritarian, quick to demand obedience, resistant to change, and increasingly out of step with the evolving music scene. Yet his show continued to thrive, bolstered by the sheer range of talent he brought to the stage. He remained a gatekeeper, but one now facing louder knocks on the door. For Holly, the fallout was double-edged. He became something more than a star. He became a symbol of rebellion, of integrity, of independence. Fans, especially younger ones, admired him not just for his music, but for his refusal to back down. He wasn't just playing rock and roll. He was living its ethos. Still, the cost was real. Being locked out of the Ed Sullivan Show meant being shut out from the biggest television stage of the era. And in a world where screen time meant stardom, it was a major setback. Their feud didn't quietly disappear. In later interviews, Sullivan reportedly took jabs at Holly, questioning his professionalism and calling his television behavior inappropriate. Holly, for his part, was unafraid to criticize Sullivan's rigid, old-school approach, describing him as stifling to creativity and dismissive of the artists he featured. The showdown between Ed Sullivan and Buddy Holly was more than just an uncomfortable night on live TV. It was a cultural moment. A brief, volatile collision between two forces moving in opposite directions. One trying to preserve tradition, the other determined to break free from it. And though the performance may have lasted only a few minutes, the ripple effect lasted for decades. The feud between Ed Sullivan and Buddy Holly wasn't just a clash between two men, it was a cultural lightning rod, igniting a firestorm of media coverage and public reaction that extended far beyond a single night of television. It marked a turning point in the relationship between mainstream media and the burgeoning youth culture that was beginning to define the American identity. The conflict, full of tension both on stage and off, revealed deep fault lines between the old world of traditional entertainment and the new, unpredictable world of rock and roll. before and after the broadcast. The hostility between Sullivan and Hawley stirred extensive debate. Newspapers, radio commentators, and entertainment columns couldn't get enough of the story. The confrontation didn't just live on in gossip, it became symbolic. It reflected a nation in flux, one where the rigid, conservative values of post-war America were starting to give way to a louder, more defiant generation. The battle between host and guest became part of the broader cultural revolution of the late 1950s, where music wasn't just entertainment, it was a challenge to the status quo. Fans of Buddy Holly, especially the younger rock and roll audience, rallied around him. To them, he was more than just a musician. He was a voice of resistance. His decision to stand firm in the face of Sullivan's demands became an act of rebellion that echoed the frustrations of an entire generation. Holly wasn't polished, he wasn't tame, and he wasn't trying to be. That's what made people love him. The controversy didn't hurt his popularity, it fueled it. His music thrived, not in spite of the incident, but because of it. For loyal viewers of The Ed Sullivan Show, the feud created a mix of emotions. Some supported Sullivan's commitment to keeping his show respectable and family-friendly. They saw Holly's defiance as disrespectful and immature. But others, especially those intrigued by the shift in popular culture, were captivated by the unpredictability of artists like Holly. The friction made the show feel more real, more immediate, and even more essential. Suddenly, Sunday nights weren't just about entertainment, they were about seeing a cultural tug-of-war unfold in real time. The feud didn't destroy Ed Sullivan's show remained a giant in American television, but the Holly incident left a scar. It exposed the growing tension between what television used to be and what it was slowly becoming. The divide between polished variety acts and raw, passionate rock music only grew wider. And while Sullivan tried to maintain control, moments like these revealed that the world was already changing, and not entirely on his terms. As the public watched the feud continue to simmer, it became clear that neither man would back down. The tension remained in the headlines, fed by sly comments and subtle jabs. Sullivan, in later interviews, often downplayed Holly's talent or professionalism, questioning his fit for television. Holly, in turn, didn't hide his disdain for Sullivan's controlling nature and unwillingness to accept artistic freedom. Their conflict came to represent something bigger than themselves. It was the battle between tradition and transformation. Even after Buddy Holly's untimely death on February 3, 1959, in the tragic plane crash that also claimed the lives of Ritchie Valens and the Big Bopper, the story didn't fade. The infamous clash with Sullivan remained one of the most talked-about moments of his career. It helped define his legacy not just as a rock pioneer, but as a symbol of fearless independence. Sullivan, meanwhile, carried on hosting well into the 1960s. But the incident with Holly remained a shadow on his record. He never truly softened. His insistence on control persisted, and it led to more conflicts with other groundbreaking artists. The Doors were famously banned after Jim Morrison ignored Sullivan's request to alter the lyrics to Light My Fire. Bo Diddley was blacklisted for playing his own song instead of the one Sullivan had approved. The pattern was clear. Sullivan demanded order, but rock and roll thrived in chaos. In the end, the Sullivan-Holly feud was never just personal. It was a public clash of values, vision, and the future of entertainment. Both men remained legendary, not only because of their talents, but because of their roles in a cultural moment that captured the imagination of a changing America. The stage may have been television, but the story was written far beyond it in the hearts of fans, in the sound of electric guitars, and in the echo of a generation refusing to be silenced. There was never a chance for reconciliation between Ed Sullivan and Buddy Holly. Holly's life was cut tragically short in February 1959, just a year after their on-air conflict. With no opportunity to mend fences, the tension between the two remained frozen in time. Yet, in the years that followed, Sullivan's stance on rock and roll appeared to soften at least slightly. Though their confrontation marked a painful chapter in his career, he continued to welcome rock acts onto his stage. Acknowledging the unstoppable rise and cultural weight of the genre, Sullivan may never have openly reflected much on the dispute with Holly, but his actions suggested a subtle shift in perspective. The show featured iconic performances by the Rolling Stones, the Supremes, the Doors, and many others. These bookings weren't just rating strategies, they represented a reluctant but necessary embrace of a changing musical era. While Sullivan never compromised the core values of his program, he began to allow a bit more creative freedom. Sensing that the tastes of the public were evolving and quickly at its height, The Ed Sullivan Show did more than just entertain. It bridged gaps. Generational divides, racial boundaries, genre lines all blurred under Sullivan's stage lights. His willingness to present black performers on national television, even when sponsors and portions of the audience were uneasy, was quietly revolutionary. Acts like Stevie Wonder, The Temptations, the Jackson 5, the Supremes, and Nat King Cole became regular fixtures. Their appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show offered national visibility at a time when such opportunities were rare, helping to push the desegregation of American media forward. The program was, in many ways, a cultural mirror. It reflected a nation in transition, and sometimes helped accelerate that transition. Whether it was introducing families to Elvis, presenting the first U.S. performance of the Beatles, or standing firm against the tides of censorship, Sullivan's show played a defining role in how Americans experience pop culture. The variety format, music, comedy, dance, interviews, novelty act, gave it universal appeal, making it a Sunday night staple for over 2 decades. But no show lasts forever. By the late 1960s, television was changing. Younger audiences were turning to edgier, more targeted programming. Variety shows were beginning to feel old-fashioned, and The Ed Sullivan Show struggled to find its place in the rapidly shifting landscape. CBS's infamous Rural Purge in 1971, aimed at repositioning its programming to suit urban demographics, finally marked the end of Sullivan's long-running show. After 23 years and over 1,000 episodes, the curtain fell. Even after the show ended, Sullivan remained active. He continued with anniversary specials and stayed connected to CBS, but his health began to decline. Diagnosed with esophageal cancer in September 1974, he passed away on October 13th that same year, at the age of 73. It was the end of an era, not just for Sunday night television, but for a form of show business that he helped define. Ed Sullivan's legacy is far from simple, but it's undeniably profound. He gave America a front-row seat to a cultural revolution, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes proudly, always on his terms. His influence shaped the trajectory of music, comedy, and television variety as a whole. The conflict with Buddy Holly remains one of the most emblematic moments of his career. Flashpoint, where old values and new ideas collided on live television. But beyond the feud, Sullivan's platform was one of the most important stages in 20th century entertainment. He didn't just host a show, he introduced a nation to its next stars, broke barriers, and created moments that would live far beyond the applause. Ed Sullivan remains a symbol of transformation of a country shifting from black and white ideals to something far more colorful, loud, and unforgettable.